The word Texas is kind of whispered. The word Paris is more apparent. It's almost as if the protagonist doesn't want you to hear the reality of where she is. It's a very somber sort of juxtaposition. I'm interpreting this as an expansion of wisdom. She is traveling internally. She is taking the tools of her craft with her. I don't need all these outfits. This is an internal journey. I just need my notebook. Conspiracy theories aside, we cannot control the weather. Jackie. When the summer breeze leaves, it's ushering in PSL season. She's comparing other people's success, just one factor about them, to her entire existential self. So that's what I thought. Tell me what you think. Hi everyone, and welcome to this video. On my channel, I analyze song lyrics very in depth through the lens of literary analysis. Today we're going to be analyzing the song Paris, Texas by Lana Del Rey from her newest album, Did You Know There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard. I've already analyzed the song Kintsugi from this album. Feel free to comment down below which song I should analyze next. We do analyze quite a bit of Lana on this channel, so if you're a fan, consider sticking around and subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Let's get started. For your reference, here's a list of literary terms I may refer to throughout this video, and as a reminder, everything I state is literally just my opinion. Music is very subjective, and I always enjoy hearing your take down below in the comments. I think it's time we get started. I find this song to be quite tranquil to listen to, and I attribute that not only to Lana's vocals, but also to the instrumentation, to the very beautiful piano melody in the background. If you watch my channel, you may have noticed that I stan piano melodies. That's why the Pride and Prejudice 2005 score is like literally one of my favorite albums. It's just straight up flutters of piano. So I really, really like this track. Something that really stuck out to me within the lyrics is the significance of place. We have specific locations referenced in this song. For example, we have Paris, Texas, literally the title of this song, Florence, Alabama, Spain, and Venice, California. The first two locations I mentioned are very interesting because when you hear the first half of the location, Paris and Florence, you think of Europe. For most people, when they hear Paris, they probably think of France. When they hear Florence, they probably think of Italy. However, the protagonist has not gone to those specific locations. I don't necessarily think that the protagonist has traveled to these places within this song. I don't think the actual location is that important, except for Venice, California. I think that the connotation of these locations within the context of the song is what's important. For me, these locations, more specifically Paris, Texas, and Florence, Alabama, I think they have an emotional connotation that's very significant, and that's what I want to discuss before we get into the actual lyrics. For most people, when they hear Paris, they think about France, and when they hear Florence, they think about Italy. However, Paris, Texas is an actual city in Texas, and Florence, Alabama is an actual city in Alabama. Texas and Alabama are within the United States. I am interpreting this protagonist as being similar to other protagonists in Lana's songs who are more often than not from California. There's nothing wrong with the city Paris in Texas or with the city Florence in Alabama. However, those two locations don't have the same connotation within pop culture that Paris and Florence do. When you think about Paris, France, and Florence, Italy, it's more glamorous, it's more exciting. And I get if you live there, maybe you don't think of it that way, but for most people who don't live in those places, it appears to be a very exciting place. There is a lot of glamour and adventure associated with it. These are locations that a lot of people romanticize and maybe aspire to travel to one day. When you listen to the first lyric of this song, when it says Paris, Texas, the word Texas is kind of whispered. The word Paris is more apparent. It's almost as if the protagonist doesn't want you to hear the reality of where she is. She doesn't want you to hear that she's not overseas in Europe. She's still within her home country. It's kind of like Paris is in bold and then Texas is in smaller font, lowercase, and in parentheses. It's not what the protagonist wants you to focus on. The glamour of the word Paris as a standalone is what the protagonist may want you to concentrate on. To me, it's giving a similar connotation as Down the Back, but Still the Louvre from Lorde's song, The Louvre, which I analyzed on this channel. I'll link it down below for you. In this song, when I see the mention of Paris, Texas, and Florence, Alabama, I think about not a lie, but a not confident truth. That's a concept I'm thinking about. To me, it feels like the protagonist is not 100% comfortable with where they're at, both literally in a setting, but also internally. These are locations we're talking about, but I view everything within this song as all being about internal states. I think about concepts such as self-esteem, self-love, and I think a lot about introspection, about where one is within the trajectory of their life and comparing that to where they want to be. If you tell someone you went to Paris and Florence, they more often than not will think that is more impressive than traveling to Paris, Texas, and Florence, Alabama. And when we think about internal states, there's a few different concepts to explore. One thing I'm thinking about here is expectations versus reality. Maybe the protagonist expected their life to be more glamorous and more elevated than it actually is. Paris, Texas is a smaller town and not as famous than Paris, France. Same thing with Florence, Alabama. They wanted the bright lights, they wanted the glamour, they wanted the city, but they're still in relatively smaller town. It has the same name, but the prestige is not the same. So we can think about this in terms of expectations. Paris, France, Florence, Italy versus reality. Paris, Texas, Florence, Alabama. We can also think about this as the protagonist trying to present things to the public in a way that will garner her more respect and more admiration. You know, this is the reality that most people judge other people based on their status and their wealth. It's not a fun reality, but that's what a majority of people, if we average them out, that's something that they value, right? Their judgment is based on what they can see and the facts that they know about you. I think about the feeling of shame here as if the protagonist is embarrassed of their reality of being in Paris, Texas instead of in Paris, France. When we think about the logistics of this, and again, I think these are all reflective of internal locations, not actual physical places. But when you think about this logistically, the protagonist, I'm assuming, is from the United States. It's much easier for her to get to Texas and to Alabama. It's closer, less expensive flight. She could literally road trip there if she wanted to. There's no way she could drive across the ocean. So in addition to the prestige and reputation and glamour that's associated with France and Italy, there's also a socioeconomic financial aspect to this as well. I'm thinking about someone who views themselves as small and someone who's embarrassed by their current situation. Those are the concepts that I'm thinking about in reference to the locations mentioned here. I think it's really interesting the way that Lana crafted this song. It is kind of heartbreaking and it's very melancholy in a sense, but it's also paired with this very beautiful and majestic sort of melody. It's very wistful. That's an emotion that I think about a lot with this song. And for me, I don't think the protagonist is necessarily going to Paris, Texas, like literally. I think that she may be traveling more internally. These are all kind of like pit stops in her mind. So there's a sense of loss that I also associate with this. It's a very somber sort of juxtaposition. It's like the real deal, Paris, France, juxtaposed with Paris, Texas. And again, literally no hate to Paris, Texas and to Florence, Alabama. But the purpose of these lyrics, in my opinion, is for there to be a juxtaposition. There is a difference in connotation between these two places, and to me that difference in connotation is showcasing where the protagonist is within her own life and how she feels about it. That being said, let's start dissecting the lyrics line by line with verse 1. I went to Paris, Texas, with a suitcase in my hand. I had to leave. Knew they wouldn't understand. Again, I do believe it's very significant that Texas is pretty much whispered when Lana is singing this. The focus is meant to be on Paris. Texas, the reality of where the protagonist is more so an afterthought. So that lyric to me already connotes a bit of maybe even cognitive dissonance that the protagonist may be experiencing. They may not be able to accept that they're not in the actual city of Paris. And Paris is not what's important. The protagonist is not chill with her reality. She expected more from herself, but the place she is very far removed from where she expected to be. Cognitive dissonance, by the way, can be defined as the perception of contradictory information and the mental toll of that. An example of this is psychological stress when someone participates in an action that goes against their ideas, beliefs, and values. So if the protagonist really believed that by now she would be in Paris, she would be in a big city that's glamorous and full of life, the stark reality of their situation is something that she can't accept. it doesn't go with her internal belief of what her life is supposed to be like, that is something that's going to cause friction. And that's something that is very mentally and emotionally exhausting. When your reality doesn't match what you believe your life should be, there's a lot of conflict that comes from that. And it's all internal. This is all a very internal song. I know the locations are external, but to me, this is a very internal world, emotion, mental, spiritual sort of song. And I will say that's how I interpret most songs, so this could totally be a me thing. Again, music is subjective. The lyric with a suitcase in my hand I find to be very important. It seems like the protagonist left quickly and with intent, almost as if something catalyzed her to leave. It also sounds like she only had one suitcase, so it's like she gathered her things quickly, anything she could fit, and then she was out the door. There's a sense of urgency that I associate with this lyric and a sense of escape. I also say that because of the next lyric that says, I had to leave, knew they wouldn't understand. It's like the protagonist had no other options. They were in a very dire situation and they had to escape. They couldn't get to Paris, France, but they were able to get to Paris, Texas. I think it is really important that there are name drops of specific locations here. To me, this is showing that the protagonist in some way cares about how she is perceived. When it says knew they wouldn't understand, this indicates to me that the very quick decision to leave by the protagonist was due to other people, either other people's actions or their opinions. This lyric is relatively ambiguous. We don't know what exactly these other people wouldn't understand, but maybe it's in regards to the protagonist's beliefs, in regards to the protagonist's dreams and what she wants to pursue. Whatever was going on here, whatever the protagonist felt like she needed to escape from, was something very intense, because she didn't just step out for a moment and go to Target and get a Starbucks to clear her head, right? She left to another location. I know that we're talking about physical locations here, but more metaphorically, I'm thinking about internal places. So to me, in my interpretation, the protagonist did not literally get a suitcase and pack it and leave. To me, internally, there was a shift for her. Internally, she is thinking in a different way and she's feeling different emotions based on the people around her, based on them not understanding her. She maybe had a dream to do something. Maybe she dreamed of Paris, France, but because of the way that her dreams were responded to internally, she's in Paris, Texas now. It's similar, the name is similar, but the vibe is different. The opportunities are different. There's not the same type of glamour. The only thing similar about it is the name, but it's not what the protagonist actually wants. Sometimes the people around you can affect your dreams and what you want for yourself. Sometimes you dim your dreams due to the people around you. Those are the sort of conceptual, emotional things I'm thinking about. Chorus number 1. When you know, you know, when you know, you know, it's time to go. There is quite a bit of repetition within this chorus and also within this song. And if you watch my videos, you know I always say that repetition signifies significance. I often argue that when certain phrases are repeated, that it's a songwriter trying to give us a message, especially when it's not the song title that's repeated, and especially with very intentional writers like Lana. However, within this song, for me personally, the repetition complements the melody really well. That's why I think there is repetition here. When the protagonist is saying, when you know, I think of intuition. There are some instances where there is no explanation and no rational way to explain your feelings and your decision making. It's just something that your soul is telling you to do. I associate a feeling of groundedness and calmness when I think about intuition. That's what I'm thinking about here in regards to these first 2 lyrics. Here I think the protagonist is realizing that she needs to leave. Either literally she needs to go to another location, or she needs to try to reorient her internal landscape and build out a strong defense for herself. Sometimes when you're around people who don't support you and who do things and treat you in a way that is conflicting to your truth, you need to build up a defense system for yourself so your dreams are protected and they can still shine bright and guide you. I also think that these lyrics are a little bit ambiguous. When I think about intuition, I think about a little bit of ambiguity as well. I view intuition as something that's very specific and pointed, but also ambiguous at the same time. It's like the concept of confidence being quiet. I view intuition as being kind of quiet, but very grounded and firm. It's very stable, very consistent. It's like dependable, but it is sometimes ambiguous because you don't know the reason why your intuition is telling you something. You just know to trust it. So I do enjoy that there's ambiguity in the lyrics here, and there's also a little bit of ambiguity present with the concept of intuition as well. I really enjoy that in more of a poetic way. I think that's beautiful. It's time to go. You can think about this as someone literally leaving a location, or maybe leaving a friendship, or you can think about this as more internal, leaving a specific mindset behind, maybe not being as open with certain people, maybe guarding your dreams and not talking about it in front of people who don't support you. There's a lot of ways to extrapolate this out. When you know, then the more you know, it's time to go. I enjoy those lyrics a lot. I think it's really interesting. I think about knowing too much. This is less ambiguous. This is when you've had a feeling about something, but then you find out an actual fact that confirms your vague feeling and you're like, huh, I was right. My intuition was correct. Another thing I think about when I read the lyric, then the more you know, is a feeling of being overwhelmed. There's a difference between having an intuitive inkling about something and then being presented with cold hard facts. It's like being ambushed with reality. Another thing that I want to mention about the repetition here, in addition to it complementing the melody, I think that it makes this song feel and sound similar to a sort of lullaby. There's a soothing element to the song, which I find interesting because I also view this song as kind of melancholy and wistful, but it's still kind of comforting in a way as well. It's very interesting. I think that all of those feelings can exist at the same time, and those are the feelings that I associate with this song. Verse 2. I interrupt this video with a very special message from myself. This is sponsored by me. I want to let you guys know that I'm offering services on the website Fiverr. I'm offering a few different things. I can help you refine your own analysis skills to develop your own unique perspective about poetry, about song lyrics, about any written work. I've also been getting a lot of messages from you guys letting me know that you use my videos to help you learn English. So if you need an English conversation partner, I'm your girl. We can converse through the internet. I can help you with pronunciation, sentence structure, and random things about American culture that are not super intuitive. If you're a songwriter or a poet and want me to read your original piece of work and provide you with a very detail-oriented feedback, I can do that as well. All that information is going to be linked down below. If you have any questions about any of the services I'm offering, please message me directly through the website Fiverr. Back to the video that you actually clicked here for. I took a train to Spain, just a notebook in my hand. Train and Spain rhyme. Yay. Hashtag rhyming. I don't think the location of Spain is that important. I think that it was chosen because it rhymed with train and it fits in with the melody of this song. That's my personal opinion. I don't think there's like a metaphorical significance for this. If you have another opinion, feel free to share it below. I'd love to hear it. And again, I do want to say that if you interpret this as a protagonist actually traveling to these places, like an Eat, Pray, Love sort of scenario, that's valid too. But for me, I'm thinking just more about internal journeys, like a mental, emotional, spiritual sort of journey. Whenever there's a mention of a train, I talk about transportation metaphors. I did this in my analysis of Taylor Swift's song, Champagne Problems, which I'll link down below. Here, I don't necessarily think transportation metaphors are that important. I think it's interesting to acknowledge it, but to me, I'm not really thinking about the protagonist's journey to places, because a journey implies that there is a span of time that it takes for someone to get from one place to another. You know, it's a journey, it's the climb. For the protagonist, I kind of think of her more as teleporting to different emotional places. It's very quick. Remember in verse 1 how the suitcase lyric made me think of something that catalyzed the protagonist to leave at a moment's notice? To me, that's like transporting somewhere internally in just a second. There's really no journey with that. It's just like an on-off switch. It's guided by your intuition. That's why to me, I'm not really thinking that much about transportation metaphors, but I'm going to explain it very briefly in case that resonates with you. With transportation metaphors, I often think about an internal journey versus an external journey. A lot of times when people are going somewhere by train, by car, by like horse and carriage, it depends on the work you're analyzing, okay? It could mean that they're entering a new era of their life. They're putting something behind them and they're looking forward. So it could be a hopeful thing. It could be an internal journey through trauma, through healing. Again, I talked about this in Champagne Problems. I also talked about transportation metaphors in Scott Street by Phoebe Bridgers. If you want to see me talk about transportation metaphors more in depth, I'll link those videos down below. In this song though, to me, a transportation metaphor is not resonating as much. What I do find significant is that the protagonist protagonist had just a notebook in her hand. A notebook is much less bulky than a suitcase, and I think this is significant because the protagonist I'm interpreting as a writer, very much like Lana Del Rey is a writer. She's a songwriter. This indicates that the protagonist values her art, values her writing. That is more valuable to her than taking 10 big suitcases. She is traveling internally and she is taking the tools of her craft with her. Perhaps the notebook is going to help her process this journey she's on. Maybe writing is her way of making sense of things. She's channeling this journey into a creative outlet, which, is going to be good. She's going to have some good creative products, but it's also a way for her to heal. I find art, and in particular writing, to be a good tool for healing and for understanding oneself. So those are the things I'm thinking about when I read these lyrics. Also makes me think that the protagonist at this point is traveling with more intent and purpose. Earlier, the protagonist was carrying just a suitcase. She had her belongings, but she wasn't as prepared. Maybe she was more frazzled. But here, there's more intent. There's just one item mentioned, a notebook. It's as if the protagonist, while on this internal journey, is gaining more understanding and knowing what she needs. I don't need all these outfits. This is an internal journey. I just need my notebook. Right? So I'm interpreting this as an expansion of wisdom. No more extraneous stuff. We're at the root of it now. We're at the soul. Then I went to see some friends of mine down in Florence, Alabama. I love the mention of friends. This connotes a feeling of warmth, which I appreciate, and I think this is definitely a progression from the first verse where I really got a sense that the protagonist was trying to escape a situation of people who didn't understand her. The fact that she's visiting friends here, again, literally or metaphorically, I think is positive and shows a good progression on this internal journey the protagonist is on. She could literally have gone somewhere to visit her friends, maybe Florence, Alabama, maybe another place, or maybe she has friends next door to her, right? Maybe she's still in the same place she's at, but her internal state is in a place where she has the bandwidth to socialize. Again, lots of ways to interpret this. I do interpret the mention of places like Paris, Texas, and Florence, Alabama as, again, showcasing like a expectations versus reality sort of thing where the protagonist still isn't settled with her reality. So the mention of Florence, Alabama to me indicates that there's still healing to be done. However, since it's paired with the protagonist visiting her friends, which I associate a feeling of warmth with, I think that she's closer to healing, but there's still room for improvement. Again, this is just my interpretation, but that is how I'm interpreting it. Chorus number 2. There are repeated lyrics in chorus 2, so I'm just going to be concentrating on the new lyrics. The new lyrics are, when you know that it's time to leave like the summer breeze. Leave like the summer breeze is so important. Summer is a season and humans can't change the seasons, right? Conspiracy theories aside, we cannot control the weather, Jackie. This is something that is ruled by Mother Nature. The protagonist doesn't just casually feel that she needs to leave. The protagonist knows this deep down. Again, this is intuition. We can't control the weather. We can't control summer ending. This is something that simply happens. This is a law of nature. The protagonist had to leave that situation. It was not possible for her to stay, just like it's not possible for it to be summer 12 months out of the year. I love that it's the summer breeze because a breeze is something light. It's something that's often welcomed, right? Especially in the summer when it's hot, when there's a breeze, you're like, it's so nice. It's a welcome thing that's a sort of relief. When the summer breeze leaves, it's making way for the brisk breeze of autumn. It's ushering in PSL season, which is wonderful. However, it is an ending of sorts. There are a lot of people who get emo when summer ends because summer is often a romanticized season. I get really stoked because I'm a fall girly, so I'm just like, bring on the PSLs, bring on the flannel, let's do this. More conceptually, you can think about the idealized time of summer is ending and a more brisk reality is coming to fruition for the protagonist. That's one way we can interpret this. But the most important thing to me is that this is something that had to happen. There was no reality in which she could stay. There is no reality in which seasons do not change. Bridge. When everyone's stars bright, brighter than you are, it's time to go. We have the word star and then an apostrophe and then the letter S. So this is not plural. This is a contraction. It's a contraction for star is. So to read it again, it says when everyone's star is bright. So let's talk about what the star could be referring to here. It could be referring to fame. If this protagonist is a creative, maybe they're trying to become a singer or an artist, a writer, a songwriter. Maybe the community they're in has people that are famous. They have star power. That's one way to think about it. Even if you're in a small town, a lot of people have small town fame. We can also think about star as more generally referring to success. And we have to remember that success is defined differently by different people. So the way that the protagonist may be measuring everyone else's star, everyone else's success could be different than what you and I may think, right? This is all very subjective to the protagonist. But she views everyone as more successful than her. Their stars are shining brighter than hers are. And she's saying it's time to go because of that. And it's interesting because it doesn't say when everyone's star is brighter than your star. It says brighter than you are. So it's as if just the stars of these people, just the success, just that one thing is brighter than the entirety of the protagonist. That is something that I find very troubling to think about. That's very, very sad. The protagonist doesn't seem to be comparing her success with other people's success. She's comparing other people's success, just one factor about them, to her entire existential self. If you are comparing the multifaceted, three-dimensional version of yourself to one dimension of someone, then you're always going to come up short. That's not a fair comparison to make. Because someone's success does not mean that they're a good person. It doesn't reflect their internal world. It doesn't reflect their friendships or their love life. It's just one factor. But the protagonist here is saying that it's brighter than her entire self. To me, I'm interpreting this as the protagonist being a little bit too hard on herself, and I'm not blaming her. This is something that a lot of people do subconsciously. To me, this is giving a glimpse into the internal world of the protagonist, and I'm thinking again about some cognitive dissonance as well. She's saying that since everyone is more successful than her, it's time to go. I'm thinking a little bit about escapism here. She is kind of triggered by the place she's in and the comparisons she's making. She can't take it. She needs to get out of that situation and away from these reminders of other people's stars. And you're the only one left dancing while they're on the floor. Time to go. This is interesting because she's dancing, but there's still people on the floor. Usually when I hear something like this in terms of a metaphor, it's when someone's dancing alone and the floor is empty. Like the party's over, everyone's walked off the floor, the heels are off, but here the people are on the floor, but they're not dancing. She's the only one dancing. This is really interesting. This could, of course, be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Please comment down below what you think. There is a dance floor that's not empty. I'm assuming the people there are standing, but the protagonist is the only one moving. And to me, I would think about that as relatively positive because the protagonist is dancing. To dance is to move. Movement is lively energy, which I interpret as positive. When you're dancing, you're one with the music. There's like abstract movement, there's emotional movement. Dancing is art. You are in tune with your emotions. Maybe there's some romance at play here, some flirtations. I view that as pretty positive. When someone's not moving, that can be viewed as stagnancy. I think another way to view this, to make it perhaps make more sense with how the protagonist is feeling, is to think about the dancing as the protagonist still trying. Everyone else has stopped trying because they've already made it. They don't need to like do the cardio and dance. They've already got the steps down. They have it memorized. They're expert ballroom dancers. They can just be on the floor with a drink in their hand and not be sweating. But the protagonist still needs to dance. She hasn't mastered the steps yet. She hasn't had her star shine bright the way that she wants it to. I think that interpretation makes more sense with how the protagonist is feeling, and perhaps she feels like a fool because she's the only one dancing. Everyone else is done with it, but she's left behind, and she's sweating and she's dancing, but everyone else is chill. Not a hair out of place and not a drop of sweat. Drinking and enjoying the party. That would also make sense when we think about Paris, Texas, and Florence, Alabama. Expectations versus reality. Being close but not there yet. The protagonist is on the same dance floor as these people. They're right next to one another. This is a juxtaposition, but they're in different places within their life. That's why earlier I said that I'm also thinking about someone who is reflecting on the trajectory of their life and where they are so far. I'm thinking about it being time to go as it being time to escape because of maybe being embarrassed. Verse 3. I flew back home. It seemed everything the same. And then there's background vocals that say Venice, California. So the protagonist, again, could have literally flown back home if you're interpreting this as literal travel, which is, again, totally valid. or she metaphorically went back home. Internally, she found herself again. She is in a place where she feels aligned with her true self. So she's back to feeling chill. However, she notices that there are some changes around her. Not everything's the same. It's kind of like when you visit your hometown after a few years, like everything's the same, but it's really not. It's really different. And that's because you've changed. It seemed everything the same except that you aren't home. Hello, I called to no one. So the protagonist is home, but she really isn't home. She's in the place she was before. It's in the place that she previously defined as her home, but it's not feeling the same. It's not the warm, cozy, home sweet home vibes anymore. I'm interpreting this as a protagonist healing, or at the very least coming to some very important understandings about herself, but still not being settled in the right place yet. It's kind of like when you've had a breakthrough in your healing journey and you feel like yourself, but you've changed so much that you need to change your internal place at rest. And when I say at rest, I don't mean like sleeping or relaxing. At rest, I'm talking about your default place. When you're healing internally, you're gonna come to different understandings about yourself and realize the changes you need to make. Your mindset is gonna shift. Your emotional landscape is gonna shift. You're gonna feel like yourself again, hopefully better. But you also realize that since you shifted those parts of you, your default setting, your default way of existing doesn't feel appropriate anymore. So you need to shift that too. It's like you're in your house, but your decor style has changed. The spaces in your home aren't set up in a way to complement your routines anymore. There's been too much change. Other things need to change too for there to be a feeling of flow and productivity. That's why it says, accept that you aren't home. This is overall positive to me because it seems like there have been some tangible, real change in the protagonist and a change for good. I find this verse to be really eloquent. It says, hello, I call to no one. This connotes a feeling of isolation or maybe seclusion. I talked about this in my Kintsugi analysis. I touched upon it very briefly, but I discussed the difference between feeling isolated and secluded. You're alone in both situations, but when there's a feeling of seclusion, it feels more intentional and more healing. But isolation feels very dark and lonely. So perhaps we're skewing more towards a feeling of seclusion in this context. You can interpret no one being home as a love interest. If you're viewing this as her literally going to physical places, maybe she came back after her travels, maybe she expected her love interest to be there, but they left. They're not there anymore. Or maybe she's getting home and realizing how alone she is. Since she was traveling before this, she was always surrounded by people. That's one way to interpret it. If you're interpreting it a little bit more similarly to me about everything being an internal journey, then when it says, hello, I call to no one, the protagonist is talking about herself. Perhaps she feels healed internally, but now she is trying to connect to the external world. And in the external world, she may be feeling like a fish out of water. Even after you heal, or even if you reach a big milestone in regards to understanding yourself, everything is still a process, right? There's things to be done after you are healed. The last lyric of verse 3 is but, and then we have the outro. So let's go there. Let's go to the outro. But when you're home, you're home. When you're home, you're home. And it says Venice, California in the background. You're home when you're alone. Very interesting. The outro is the only spot in the song that, for me personally, I'm thinking about a physical location more literally. It says, when you're home, you're home. The first time it says when you're home, I'm thinking about a physical place. So when you're physically home in Venice, California, then you're home internally. So perhaps she feels at ease when she is in a physical location that she defines as her home, which we can assume is Venice, California. Or the first time it says when you're home, it could be referring to her internal state. So when you're home internally, when you feel at peace with yourself, when you actually feel like yourself, there's no cognitive dissonance at play, then you feel home wherever you are, but your actual home base feels more welcoming to you. I hope that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is that there are moments where you don't feel at home in your actual home because of your internal state. But once you figure out your internal state, your emotions, your mindset, and everything, your actual home seems more welcoming to you. Everything is about perspective, and perspective can be subconscious too. When you're at war with yourself internally, when there's such strong cognitive dissonance vibes, then your actual home that you curated and you love may feel foreign to you. And all of that is the reflection of your internal state. When you feel at peace within yourself and when you feel at home within yourself, that's also projected outwards. That's another way to view these lyrics. That's the interpretation I'm a little bit more partial towards. Venice, California has always been this protagonist's home, but it feels more like her home now after this internal journey. You're home when you're alone. This is really interesting. For me, I think about a feeling of peace when you come to an important realization or you are healed. You find comfort in being alone because you are comfortable with yourself. That's what I think about. You're home when you're alone. You're okay with being alone. It's not anything scary. It's energetically peaceful. When you're right, you're right. Even when you're wrong. Again, remember, this song is pretty ambiguous, especially this outro, so my interpretation does not have to be the same as yours. I'm not saying I'm right. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think, right? It matters how you feel about the song. But for me, when I read these lyrics, I think about doing what's right for you. What you're doing could be right for you, but wrong for everyone else in the room. People can disagree with you. They can make you want to metaphorically pack a suitcase and metaphorically leave, but you're still doing what's right for you. Even if you're wrong by someone else's standards, you could be doing the most correct thing for yourself. And to me, when I read those closing lyrics, it makes me think that the protagonist has confidence in her decision making. She knows what she needs to do for herself, and most importantly, she trusts herself enough to do it. Hashtag self-love, hashtag self-care, hashtag that's the end of the song. All in all, I find this song to be about a very important internal journey. I associate this song with a journey of healing, of self-acceptance and understanding. I also think about coming to terms with your reality and not really thinking about what other people think. I say those last two things because of locations like Paris, Texas, and Florence, Alabama. Expectations versus reality, public perception. I do view this song as pretty ambiguous, but to me, those are the sorts of concepts that I think about every time I hear them. This is a very haunting song. Again, it sounds like a lullaby, but a very melancholy and somber sort of lullaby. I do view the ending as much more positive than the beginning. I think there was a sort of progression that the protagonist experienced. I view the protagonist as being in a more emotionally balanced state by the end of this song, which is very beautiful and something I really enjoy. So that's what I thought. Tell me what you think down below in the comments. I do want to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. My tutoring and consulting services are linked down below. Feel free to check it out. I'll see you next time. Bye!